Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the morning meeting. Today, we're giving away a canary yellow Porsche later in the program.
Used. It's used.
Please buy your raffle tickets now. We'll have one lucky winner. The second runner-up will receive 2 weeks in Philadelphia. Thank you for joining. Sean, Dan, and I will run you through the day's events, and then we'll take your questions. If you're on the two-way platform, we'd welcome you. We'd urge you. We'd encourage you to raise your hand. Yesterday, we had 3 new people. Not sure yet whether I'll demand 3 new people or program will be canceled or not. Haven't decided yet. So that's along with the raffle for the yellow Porsche, a little bit of suspense on today's episode. If you're watching on YouTube or on X, please do not raise your hand. You'll look silly in front of your coworkers, pets, or children. But do write in the chat all you wish. Just don't put smack in there. Ask yourself before you type, does this reflect the peace, love, and understanding that Sean and Dan exude? If not, don't write it. No smack in the chat, as they say. On the schedule today, the President of the United States. First of all, he let the New York Times be the print pooler. So glass notes exists there in the White House. I like how the fact that TV is Fox, but the secondary TV is OAN. They have a broad range of television coverage. President has one public event on his schedule, open to the pool in the state dining room at noon 05. He participates in a multilateral lunch with African leaders. Gentlemen, what would they serve at that lunch? What would the African leaders be getting?
Ooh.
Fish and chips, burgers and fries.
It's a burger and fries kind of day.
Yeah, I don't know. So state dining room is a good place to eat. Don't know what the vice president's doing. I do know that Marco Rubio did go to the cabinet meeting yesterday, as Sean suggested, although he did not talk more than other cabinet members. But now he is finally in Asia for the in Kuala Lumpur for the various meetings with different alliances. And at 2:00 today, Secretaries Noam and Hegseth attend a virtual FEMA Review Council meeting. No idea what that means, but they're doing it. Congress is in face-off, still to be determined how this will end up, but the former White House physician to Joe Biden, Dr. Kevin O'Connor, the world's quietest doctor, is due to testify in a closed session with the House Oversight Committee, but we don't know whether he's going because, as of my last check, there had been no resolution on the question of whether he would be able to invoke doctor-patient confidentiality on some of these matters. Number of ambassadorial confirmation hearings taking place in the Foreign Relations Committee, including, well, they're not the hearings, they're the confirmation votes, including on Kimberly Guilfoyle to be the ambassador to Greece. Mike Johnson at 11 is attending a congressional medal ceremony for Greg LeMond. It's Wednesday, which means the Senate lunches are taking place. And right after lunch, the senators meet in a bipartisan configuration to talk to Bibi Netanyahu. Gavin Newsom, we'll talk about that later in the program, is spending his second day in the Palmetto State in South Carolina, where he was well received by, amongst others, Jim Clyburn yesterday. Macron, 2-day of his 3-day visit in the UK. A couple of court hearings today of significance. 10 a.m. U.S. District Court. Here's a challenge from the ACLU on the Trump administration expedited removal for rapid deportation policy. And 2:00 in the U.S. District Court, a challenge from the Justice Action Center on the same issue.
I will tell you, by the way, you mentioned Netanyahu's continued the time here in D.C. I was in downtown D.C. yesterday evening. He's at Blair House. So normally he stays at the Willard, and they've got this whole pomp and circumstance and that shuts down, but he's staying at Blair House. But the security last night for Bibi's visit here, I mean, normally it's pretty significant. Last night, you would have thought that it was a UN meeting of every state. I mean, it was unbelievable, like how it's grown.
Yeah. The last time I saw him in D.C. was when he was in D.C. to address a joint session of Congress, and it coincided with Joe Lieberman's memorial service. And it was at a synagogue in Northwest Washington. And same thing, Sean. I've never seen security like this.
Well, no, I mean, you're right, but I felt like
it's bigger than the president's.
Much bigger. I mean, they had. It was just amazing that, like, I literally thought that he must be out to dinner because as you walked out, DC police had cars lined up in places that I had. I mean, it has grown every time he comes. It's big.
You and I, we've all seen massive security at things like G7s or whatever. This was phenomenal. What it was, and the amount of firepower and barriers erected. It's quite something. And I wonder if it's based on a specific threat or just, he's Benjamin Netanyahu. All right, let's talk about Russia. The president yesterday, as we said on Two-Way Tonight, broke the record for a number of times saying bullshit by an American president in a cabinet meeting. He said it twice. He said it in connection to the New York City mayor's race, but he also said it in connection to Putin. And I find it interesting that the president of the United States can say bullshit, and yet almost every news organization, put in asterisks, like they can't say bullshit, but the president can. A little odd to me.
Well,
anyway,
and he said the F word the other week when he was getting on Marine One. So.
He's our most publicly profane president, but don't mistake that for the private profanity, because Joe Biden, Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, both George Bushes, man, they used the F word as a noun, a gerund, an adjective, all the time. Anyway, this president does it in public. Last night, number 103, the Russians, after the president, basically said to Putin, I don't like what you're doing. They launched another record drone attack on Ukraine, killed a lot of people, damaged a lot of property. The Europeans are obviously impatient. Yesterday, both Thune and Lindsey Graham suggested that they were ready to move the bipartisan sanctions bill at the urging of the White House or in consultation with the White House, and maybe make an adjustment to it that would be even more to the liking of the administration. So we've talked about this quite a bit, Dan. It seems like the president is now headed in a pretty unilateral way towards the Wall Street Journal editorial page position, which is you're going to have to force Putin to the negotiating table with a lot more assistance to Ukraine. Do you think that's where we're headed?
Yes, I do. And I've been pleasantly surprised to see that Trump is continuing to do it. They floated last night sending, Patriot batteries now to Ukraine. I think it's great. I mean, the question that I think Trump is staring at is, are we potentially going to go back to the kind of stalemate where you have, these trench lines that don't move very far, and Putin's just waiting for us to back off? Because that's what I've said for the last 4 or 5 months. It means potentially fighting for several more years.
So what I think President Trump showed us in Iran was that it's not a black and white situation either or. And I think what he is going to, I believe, do in Russia is, after giving Putin the opportunity to find a path to peace, say, all right, you didn't take it my way. And then last night's escalation definitely wasn't a smart move on Putin's behalf, because all of the people that want Trump to do something are now emboldened and say, Mr. President, this is how he reacted to you. So I think I wouldn't be surprised if Trump goes even a little over the top and says, fine, you want to show you, Putin, what I can do? I'm going to hand Ukraine some additional stuff. I'll force you to the table, and I'm going to make this even more painful. But I think that the dumbest thing people can do is back him into a corner. It will, and it will result in, I think right now Ukraine's going to probably get something. My only point is, if you're going to do this, and where I fault the Biden administration, one, in terms of accountability of what we gave Ukraine, or lack thereof. But two, if you're going to tell them that they can, help them, then help them and let them win. The idea of giving them just purely defensive stuff at some point, that's never going to result in a different outcome. So I think the question becomes, do we arm them further that they can go on the offense and actually achieve a desired result? Because being defensive just prolongs everything and wastes a ton of money, and it results in additional death.
Well, but hold on. Were you just talking about Biden, or did you mean Trump? Because Trump said we're providing them purely defensive weapons.
No. And that's right. But that was the Biden 4 years.
But that's been everyone's, because at the end of the day, the difference between Iran and here is we went into Iran and hit them where they are.
Right.
No one has had, and I think appropriately so, that's a big line to cross with Russia. The question for Trump is, Putin's history is waiting people out. What is it, 20 years?
Right.
Yeah.
So he plays the long game.
If the president, neither of you is named Jack Keane or Tony Cordesman, but if the president decided to go all in and give them everything and go further than Biden and give them offensive weapons, help them with intelligence, could Putin be defeated or brought to the table at that point? Because I'm not even sure that's true.
I mean, the question really is, I think there's, Mark, you've said this, it's their economy. Can it keep humming along, and can they provide it? And then just how many bodies are they willing to sacrifice?
And public opinion. But Mike, unless you decisively beat him, I think you would just have use the bloody shirt to just rally public opinion on his behalf.
Unless they start hitting 1 million casual. I mean, at some point, even in Russia, I mean, just like in Afghanistan, they started saying enough. They started running out of money. The economy was going sideways, and there were a lot of bodies.
That took a lot, though.
I agree.
I'm very pessimistic that he'll do enough. I think he might do enough to avoid being accused of losing, and he might do enough to change Putin's rhetoric slightly. But I don't think the will is there to do enough to either change the trajectory of the war or force Putin to the table to agree to the stuff he won't agree to, which, by the way, is a good deal for him. I mean, under the circumstances, it's a good deal for him.
But hold on a second. Is it a good deal for him? Because what you just said basically is it's inevitable that we will give up.
I don't know that we'll give up, but I don't think we can win. I think we can just waste more time and money
But that's not wasting time and money because he doesn't win.
Well,
I know, but I mean, that's the challenge.
A lot more people die. He still has Crimea. I mean,
when you say a lot more people die, the Ukrainians say we will sacrifice to defend and keep our country.
But they're not. They're not.
What do you mean they're not?
They're not. They've lost a lot of their country.
They've lost like 20%. The other 80% still. Well,
20%.
Keeping 80 is better than keeping 0.
Yeah.
No, but I mean, I think this is the issue for Trump, and it's a remarkable turn because I agree with you, Mark. He's staring at this thing. I lose Ukraine, or we are now going to potentially go into a decades-long kind of hot cold war with Russia and Ukraine.
Well, and there's also another factor here, and I mentioned this yesterday, the day before, but China understands the importance of this as well.
Really?
And I think so part of this sometimes is recognizing that it's not just one domino that falls. And so it's not just about Ukraine, it's about Russia. It's not just about Russia, it's about China. And I think that for Trump, when he starts hearing about this, and to your point, this is how it's going to play out for decades on end, he doesn't want that part of his legacy.
Yeah. We could talk about tariffs for the hour, and my thinking about it suggests to me we should all say one sentence about tariffs, because the whole thing is just a big up in the air thing. And that doesn't mean it's a mess and it won't succeed, but I don't think there's much to say definitively. But Sean, what's the one thing you want to say about tariffs?
Ongoing.
Yeah. Okay. Dan.
What's good enough for Trump to declare victory?
Yeah, I'll say this. I think it's possible, from what I've heard, that an EU deal is possible. Now, a deal, as the New York Times points out today, doesn't mean like signed, sealed, and delivered actual deal. But if he can get a good enough deal with the EU and keep them from going to Beijing later in the month, that'd be amazing. And I think it's within possibility. All right, congressional agenda. You have lots of members: Crapo, Johnson of Wisconsin, Jody Arrington, is that his name? Arrington?
Yeah. Arrington. Yeah.
And other members saying yes, with no more specificity than the speaker has. Yes, we should do another reconciliation bill in the fall. Some people want to use it to make more cuts. Some people want to use it to spend more. I mean, there's all sorts of ideas about what to do. But you also have the rescission bill now with the Senate, and they're trying to decide what to do. Sean, I'm surprised at how little conversation there's about this. Now that the big reconciliation package is in law, what is the president's primary congressional agenda? What are his priorities for Congress in the balance of the year?
So first, it is interesting. This rescission package, I think, will pass the same way that the big, beautiful bill did. It is amazing to me as a Republican to see Republican senators stand up and fight for PBS and NPR funding. It is frankly a disgrace to anyone who has an R next to their name that you're willing to lay down and fight for funding of a non-essential government function like that, regardless of the bias that's clear from both of those institutions. I can't believe that we even have to discuss this in the Republican conference on the Senate side. That being said, that passes. I then think that you're going to turn to, look, let's look at the timeline, which is more like you get through, we go into August recess because that's the reality. They pass this. The Senate comes back, and then we have to fund government. That's the priority. And that will take up basically the rest of the fall. Then we go out of session. There might be some cats and dogs, and then you come back. and you're in an election year. And I say all that because this gets back to the question you're asking. There is no consensus about what's next big wise. They sort of got it all done. And if you recall, at the beginning of the year, it was like maybe we split it in two: border security, some energy, DoD funding, and then we go with the tax cuts later. They got it all. So the dog caught the car. And now they have to figure out what's next. I suspect you're going to see further action on immigration, in particular, visa reform, et cetera. And then maybe some regulatory efforts. But this idea of a second reconciliation bill, I'm vastly supportive of, but it's sort of like the same time when you ask everyone, would you like to go to dinner? And everybody says, yes, we'd love to do that. And then you go, where should we go? And then you get 50 different answers.
What do you want? What do you want in a second reconciliation bill?
Well, I'd love to see. I mean, here's the thing. I think a lot of conservatives would like to see entitlement reform, but it's not going to happen. They don't have any desire to touch it.
So if that's not going to happen, what would you?
That's what I'm saying.
Well, but why are they all? But why are they all enthusiastic about another reconciliation package?
Because they just got off the last ride at the park, and they were like, "This was cool. Let's go on the next ride."
Okay, let me ask you this, Sean, and then I want Dan to weigh in. Even in the most partisan times of Clinton, Bush, and Obama, there were some big bipartisan legislative projects out there. They didn't all pass, but is there anything the president's going to do before the midterms that requires 60 votes?
I mean, like I said, the only thing that I think is going to be funding government, maybe some additional Doge type things, but they got it. They caught the car. This is it.
There's bipartisan bills on education. There's bipartisan bills on housing. Are those not?
I mean, look, that's what I respectfully call that small ball. Like, there's nothing. I mean, they might pass something, but I don't see.
That's because you own several homes, so you don't care if the housing's more affordable. Dan, where's the congressional agenda? I don't remember a moment in my 72 years covering Washington where there was no, like, there was not even guesswork of any specificity about what the president's congressional agenda is.
Yeah, I mean, I think to Sean's point, though, Trump likes big, bold stuff. And he feels like literally he called it the big, beautiful bill. So if you turned around and said, here are three big things we need to do, then then the big, beautiful bill was not quite so big and beautiful. So I think it is an interesting question. I think what's fascinating on the Democratic side, and you can see this train wreck that is looming on the horizon for us, is I think, Sean, you're right. They are going to pass this rescission package. The reason there's so much anger about it is this is stuff that was agreed to on a bipartisan basis to get out of the last budget jam that we were in. So you are turning around and you had a handshake, you had a deal to get the votes, the 60 votes to pass the last budget. And now the administration's turning around and saying, we're actually now not going to do this. We're going to undo this stuff. Well, and where this is interesting is Chuck Schumer got hammered for getting the 60 votes to get that budget deal through last time. The next budget fight is coming. His own caucus is saying, you can't trust them. Look at what they just did. They're doing a rescission package. They did Doge. They did all this stuff. They're going to go home in August. Democrats are going to get killed by the base. You got to fight. I mean, literally, you need to get arrested, like all of this crazy, in my opinion, totally crazy stuff. And they're going to come back in the fall. And I don't see how Chuck Schumer agrees to it.
I agree.
And if there's a shutdown, it is a disaster for us, in my opinion.
I agree.
Well, that's the problem, is that there's nowhere to go. There's no consensus. Even on the small ball stuff, I don't know that Democrats would get rewarded working for Trump on education or even housing or any of that stuff. They'd probably get crushed. Bless you.
But I think it's a good idea, though.
I don't
be caught trying. Yep.
Yeah, I just don't see either side wanting to spend any political capital on that. And that's why and the one thing we mentioned this, the court ruling last night, 8-1, to give the president the authority. They believe, and I think rightly so, that they can do a lot more, everything pretty much through executive action and order. Yeah. Why go through Congress when I can do 80% of what I want to do? Now, I don't agree. I am a believer that I think the Republican Party should think about what it wants to lock in so it can't be undone. We have learned the lesson of executive orders. They're great for 4 years, but they're not codified in law. So I would argue spend some time on immigration, things that we need to get done so that they don't undo them, which is frankly the lesson of the tax reform, which is, hey, if you let stuff expire. So, but I just don't know what else is on the list.
Yeah, I don't know this quantitatively, but my impression is that after a checkered one-loss record early on in the federal courts. The president's on a bit of a roll. Obviously, at the Supreme Court he is, but even in the district and courts of appeals, he's doing pretty well. And obviously that makes a huge difference with all this executive action. All right, we have a few more topics to get to, and then we'll get to your questions. So if you'd like to be in the conversation, please, by all means, raise your electronic hand. Wall Street Journal has the best story anybody's written to date about where the president stands on a new Fed chair. It matches my reporting exactly, so I recommend it to you. And it suggests, if you read it carefully, that if Scott Bessent wants it, he can probably have it. If he doesn't, Kevin Hassett, who I believe will get it in the end, is the front runner. The other Kevin Warsh, is, I don't believe, playing his trump cards nearly as well. And I'd be surprised if he got it, and it takes a lot to surprise me. Since that story published, I've seen some Republican senators pouring cold water on the notion that Bessent could be both the independent Fed chair and stay on as Treasury Secretary. So let's just put a bow on this one. Who will President Trump make the Fed chair, Sean?
Scott Bessent.
Yeah.
Dan.
Yep, I agree.
Can I do the why?
Kevin. I'm still going with Kevin.
I have to do the why.
My Kevin. Yeah.
So when you here's the question that anyone who would be wanting to be considered, Dan, if you were in line to be asked to be Fed chair, what do you think the number one question you think that Trump would probably ask you?
Interest rates.
Right. Okay. So we just did that in 10 seconds. When Bessent was on the Sunday shows, he got asked that question that everybody was going to say, if you take the job as Fed chair, President Trump's going to ask you to cut Fed chair. Mark Halperin, what is the standard Washington answer when it comes to any question about jobs for the future?
I don't answer questions about the future.
Yeah, this will be a job for the president to make. Yeah, I'm loving my job right now. I'm focused on the work of the American people, blah, blah, blah. Do you know what his answer was, though?
Yeah, I noticed.
Process.
That. Yeah.
He said the Fed chair can't unilaterally do that. In fact, it's the job of the board.
The committee.
That is a man who thought through that question, figured out how to navigate it perfectly, give himself some air cover for confirmation in future questions.
Yes.
That is a man who wants that job.
I think he's interested in it in the abstract, but it's not as interesting as his current job. And in the end, I think the president will think he's too valuable in his current job.
Well, but I think, though, Mark, this goes to what we talked about earlier, which is there is no real agenda next year. And I think if you're best that you've had a historic year.
Well,
I think it's going to. So then you move on to the.
I think he wants to beat China. All right. Here we go. Epstein.
Okay.
Epstein. Sean yesterday said.
Are we still talking about Epstein?
Exactly. Sean yesterday said that only a sliver of MAGA was concerned about this. Let me read you a partial list of people who, in the current news cycle, have expressed pretty strong outrage about the administration's posture. Daily Mail, New York Post, Fox News, Musk, Bannon, Tucker, Glenn Beck, Benny Johnson, Laura Loomer, a few others. I am very familiar with Donald Trump not liking reporters' questions. We all are. But I believe the answer he gave yesterday in trying to wave this away went beyond the normal, you're raining on my parade because I want to talk about X and you're talking about Y. For those of you who didn't see it, here's the president yesterday when Pam Bondi was asked some questions about Jeffrey Epstein. 105, please.
Are you still talking about Jeffrey Epstein? This guy's been talked about for years. You're asking, we have Texas, we have this, we have all of the things. And are people still talking about this guy, this creep? That is unbelievable. Do you want to waste the time, and do you feel like answering?
I don't mind answering.
President. I mean, I can't believe you're asking a question on Epstein at a time like this, where we're having some of the greatest success and also tragedy with what happened in Texas. It just seems like a desecration, but you go ahead.
Sure. First about.
So, Sean, you know the president well. Do you share my view that that had more purpose to try to intimidate reporters from asking about it ever again, as opposed to he didn't want it now? Because the guy takes questions on everything. I mean, he took questions the other day on the name of the Washington football team. So how do you read that answer?
I don't think he wanted to talk about it.
Well,
clearly.
But with what motive? Was it really the desecration of the people who lost their lives in Texas? Or is there some other reason he doesn't want to talk about it?
I think there's obviously, I don't think it takes any deep reporting to realize that there's a lot of potential. Dan touched on this yesterday. There are a lot of people at a high level in politics and finance, and I'm sure media and other things that have been involved in or around Jeffrey Epstein. And I'm sure that, many of them are friends or associates or former business partners. And it's just, to him, probably a subject that he does not want to discuss because of that. And because of the relationships that, and the problem with this whole issue, I've talked about it with several people, is that there's no easy answer. You can't list part of the list or only the Democrats or only, you either have to do all of it or none of it.
But they now say there's no such thing as a list.
I get that. But to Dan's point again yesterday, I think that it doesn't take a ton. This would be not in keeping with Epstein's past and how he related.
Yeah. Dan, is it dead as a story, as an issue for the administration, or not?
No, it's not. No, you live by conspiracy theory, you die by conspiracy theory. He played a role in hyping this the last several years. I mean, you can't just turn the spigot off now and say nothing to see here. It's over.
All right. Gavin Newsom, as we said, second day in South Carolina. I think by most measures, he had a successful first day, pretty well attended events. He was late for things, but not Bill Clinton late, just an hour late. And maybe best of all for him, he got a very warm reception, both in the event itself he did with Representative Clyburn, so-called kingmaker of the Palmetto State, as well as a Clyburn appearance on CNN. Clyburn treated him openly like he was a presidential candidate. He said, "I feel good about his chances." And here is Clyburn speaking at an event with Newsom. 106, please.
And we cannot just focus on the presidency. We got to build a foundation. So as we go around welcoming these candidates who are running for president, let's not forget about school boards. Oh, yeah. Let's not forget about school boards.
All right, you can dump out of that. Pretty good Chaplin-esque physical humor there. Here's Clyburn later in the day, appearing on CNN, giving the Clyburn housekeeping seal of approval to the gentleman from California.
Do you believe he is an effective messenger on behalf of the Democratic Party?
Oh, yes, I do. He's been there for some time now. Gavin Newsom has established a record in California that's enviable. He's been around the country over the last several years, carrying the message of the Democratic Party. And I think he would be a viable candidate going forward if he were to run. And so I do think that people are listening to him, and they are listening to the Democratic Party in a big way.
All right, that's a pretty warm embrace from the person in the party literally you'd most want a warm embrace from. We talked yesterday about how South Carolina's got the best chance of it, probably any state, of being high in the order of voting. And here is 1 minute of the man himself after his 3,000-mile trip. And again, he did a ton of events, but here's 1 minute of Gavin Newsom in South Carolina.
I come from a small state on the west coast of the United States. Our state of mind is pretty simple. We're the most un-Trump state in America. That's a point of pride. Point of pride. I confess that. If you didn't know that, just want to let you in on a little secret. I'm not his favorite politician in the country, nor on Fox News, or One American News, or Newsmax, or any of the other networks, Sinclair. I mean, it's actually, yeah, why the hell did you invite me? We cannot let him win. We cannot allow him to win. So that's why I'm here. That's why I'm here. You have agency. You can shape the future.
So, Sean, if you take the number of votes that Donald Trump got in California in 2024 compared to the population of Rhode Island, how do those numbers compare?
Give me the math again. If I take the number,
what's the number of Republican votes Donald Trump got in California, and how many people total live in Rhode Island? Because he said He said on the most
just below. I said this is a very Tucker question.
Yes, yes. You're right. 1.2 million people live in our tiny little state of Rhode Island. Trump got 6 million votes in California.
Yeah.
So when he says it's the most un-Trump state, I don't know what metric he's using. In any event,
percentage. I'm sure.
in any event, Dan.
Yeah. But by the way, hold on. I just want to say what you got to pay attention to what he said at the end. We've got to fight Trump, blah, 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 blah. That's why I'm here in Kershaw, South Carolina.
Exactly.
What for what?
Yeah.
What was the it's so blatant. I give the guy credit, but it's just so blatant. He's like, I'm not running for president. I just happen to be here in Kershaw, South Carolina on a friggin' Tuesday to fight Donald Trump on an issue that there's nothing to fight him on.
Dan, if you were in the Bruce Lindsay role, which is you're the elder statesman who travels with the candidate, and after the event ends, you're supposed to, in the car to the next event, tell him how he did. Yeah. Oh, you're on fire. What would you say? What critique would you give Gavin Newsom based on that minute?
He did a great job. I mean, look, you got to win the primary before you win the general. And the first thing right now in a crowded pack is starting to kind of break out a little bit, get your name out there, build some buzz. He's doing it. Like, we can all debate, is it a good general election message? California is the most un-Trump state. I'm not the favorite of Fox News. But those are great lines. Compare that to Joe Biden, we would all laugh, and compare it to Kamala Harris, who is very stilted and awkward. Yeah. He's smooth. He's comfortable. He looked like he's having fun. I cannot underestimate how big a deal what Jim Clyburn said is. The number of text messages that I got, I was not watching all day that, and my phone started going off. Did you just see what Jim Clyburn said? I guarantee you in, Harrisburg and Denver and Springfield, Chicago, people are like, WTF.
Yeah.
I will say this I may be really good at predicting Democratic primaries, but I'm not sure that I'm the person that anyone on that side cares about. I will say, to me, having Jim Clyburn say the words that he did about Gavin Newsom will resonate well beyond South Carolina and be crucial among the black voters that make up a key constituency. So if you're going to have one, that to me, that in itself, you get in the car, I don't care if you're Bruce Lindsay or Bob Smith, you're going to say, boss, getting Clyburn to say those things was a huge win.
Well, and look, he didn't just say him. He went on television later and talked more about him. I mean, that is not
and he called Kamala Harris his girl, right? Didn't you know what he said? Like he's doing this without knowing. Yeah.
We're getting breaking news. The White House is waiving the executive privilege for the former Biden doctor to testify.
Yeah. I'm not sure he'll care about that because it's not about the executive privilege, but you know what I mean? It's a doctor patient.
Well, that
Let's get back to Gavin Newsom. Don't change that.
Exactly. Anyway, I'll say I agree. Of course, I agree with you about Clyburn. I still don't think he's going to run, but I'll tell you with that. I don't. With that performance.
How do you go to Kershaw County for 2 days and not say I'm going to run? I don't get that one.
It's testing. I will say that what that performance reminds us of is something that I continue to say, which is this field is big and overrated. You have to be an aircraft carrier to do this. He is smooth. He's polished. He knows how to go into any room. And most of these other people do not. So if he does run, he's a first tier candidate. And I'm not sure who else is in the first tier besides Buttigieg. He's not running.
Mark, hold on a sec, because you just said he's testing. If you go to South Carolina and you get a reception like that, you get buzz like that, and you get Jim Clyburn all but leaning into
call his daughter and ask her if she wants him to run.
So if I am applying for a job and all the pieces are there, don't you turn to your family? And
you turn to your family and say, we got to relocate to Cincinnati for 3 years, and if we get a promotion, then you're going to be trailed by Secret Service for 4 years.
Why would you even test the waters if the decision's there?
Because life and families are filled with ambiguities. That's why.
Look, I'm sorry. I can't. He got a great reception, and I've seen enough. Joe Biden ran knowing how screwed up his family was, and he still did it. These guys who are at that level are willing to overlook a lot when it comes to their family and everyone else.
I totally agree.
Because they're so damn big.
I need to be on a show with less cynical people. Evan, welcome in. We're not going to talk about the New York City mayor's race.
Oh, look at those people over your shoulder.
Evan,
Great.
welcome in. Thank you for being part of Two Way. Tell us where you are. What's on your mind?
I'm in Long Island. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So
Which fork are you on, sir?
I'm actually in the center,
In the
but
center.
a little closer to the North Shore. I'm not out east.
Okay.
Like Locust Valley area?
Plainview.
Yeah, okay.
Plainview, very nice.
Exit 48.
Very nice. Near my favorite Walmart.
Really? Which
Yeah.
one?
Go ahead.
So I appreciate the show and the educating people in a civil manner.
Thank you.
Unfortunately, I don't get to watch all the episodes. And so I had a quick question. I was wondering if, Mark, you have so many different platforms, I can't keep track of them, but if you'd ever do a political potpourri, whether we can raise questions that aren't, necessarily topical to what's going on.
You can raise whatever you want. It's an open mic night here.
Okay, so I'll go real quick. So, for example, one of mine is what would have been the consequence if Ralph Nader had never been a third-party candidate? Because Gore would have certainly won Florida, and then all those dominoes would have fallen. My family, the nutty part of my family, was involved in his campaign. Sean, I have come to genuinely appreciate your perspective on things. It's a perfect example of not to let your first impression be your only impression. That said, would you be happy if the people who are important to you in your life exercise the same level of integrity that Donald Trump has in his? I'm not a Trump fan, but I do have to say that if the election were held today and he was running against a fill-in-the-blank Democrat, he probably would get my vote. And I'll just finish off. Parenthetically, given all the discussion about Mamdani, my grandfather actually was a mayoral candidate in New York City on the socialist ticket in the late 40s and early 50s, and he would probably now be considered what Steve Bannon calls a limousine liberal. But he did publicly come out against McCarthy, which was fairly brave of him at the time. And ironically, you were talking about Clyburn, who, I'm sorry, I can't stand the impact that South Carolina has, or octogenarian politicians at this point. But I was thinking this beforehand. Is there any scenario where Pete Buttigieg run, because to me he's the best intellect in the entire field, that Pete Buttigieg could carry South Carolina, given it's a harsh way of saying it, the antipathy that religious African Americans have towards the gay community. Last thing, and Mark, please take this in the spirits intended. Some time ago, you were accused of leaning left, and you were clearly annoyed by this take, and you asked for examples. And I was loving the back and forth, and it's when you were following up with Joe Scarborough and all of what was going on with his take on the Biden situation. And you had a forum unrelated to that, where it included a professor, happened to be African American, from a university in Ohio, and she said that she denied there was a liberal bias in college academia, and you didn't challenge it. And to me, that might, if I had to come up with one example, that was it. And I just figured maybe you were stunned because this observation is akin to the sun rising in the west.
Someone on this platform said there was no liberal bias in universities.
Yes, not on this specific one. One of your various I can't keep track of your schedule, Mark.
But a show that I was on.
A show that you were hosting. There were 4 or 5 people on it. A very nice woman, a professor from Ohio University, said that there was no liberal bias, and I'm sitting there stunned, and I'm waiting.
If I didn't, I don't remember it. If I didn't intercede, it was because I was so stunned I couldn't speak. That would be my only.
By the way, it was literally right around the time that you were dealing with Joe Scarborough, and I actually thought you were a little soft on him. And then I said, you did ask him repeatedly, would you have changed anything, I think. And then I said, you're friends with a guy. At some point in time, you can only attack him so many times, and then you just.
Well, I'll never attack him. I'll have a spirited debate with him. All right, Evan, you raised a ton of issues. Let's just go to Dan to address the ones he wants to address, then Sean, and then I'll do what's left. Dan.
So I'll just take the Pete Buttigieg in South Carolina. It is a great question because I agree that Buttigieg has a lot of talent and I think has a lot of potential. But his big Achilles heel today is he knows he has had trouble with the Black community. He has invested in the last year or so, and even going back to being transportation secretary, in trying to strengthen his relationships and standing in the community, and he's still at 0%. and it's politics, you have to put it on the table. Historically, the Black community has been hesitant to embrace the gay community, and that is, especially in the South, it will be something he's going to have to overcome as he thinks about trying to get the nomination. And I'll just say, by the way, Mark is very public about the media and academia being biased. I'll speak up on his behalf. If he let one puck slip by the goalie, no goalie is perfect.
I assumed he was stunned.
I might have been daydreaming about sushi.
Or
Sean.
texting. Let's be honest.
Yeah, Sean.
I still believe that Pete Buttigieg will be the nominee, and short people don't win the presidency. I say that as a short person, so he will then lose. But I do agree with Dan. He has got a significant problem. He did try through a lot of grant money and programs to win back support in the Black community, especially in cities. I don't know that it did him a ton of good.
There was a poll the other day where he had 0% of the Black vote.
Right. That's high.
That's high. Rounded down.
So I think that's, we've talked about this before, and this is why sometimes, you have to understand how the game is played matters, and the schedule the DNC puts out and the allocation of delegates, et cetera, is going to matter to him, because if it's an old school thing, Iowa, New Hampshire, he's got a path. If it starts again with South Carolina, it makes it very difficult. So anyway, I say that because I do think that he is, he has got his challenges. But I still think that he checks enough of the boxes for the Dems in the primaries that they think he looks attractive to them on paper. We'll see if he can put together a good campaign. On your other point, Evan, I would just say this: I've known President Trump now going on 10 years. We've had some very personal moments, some very public ones, and some very personal ones. I am the kind of person, if you look back throughout my career, I've worked for, probably 15 members of Congress and candidates in the cycles that I've been involved in. And I don't know that I've ever publicly broken with anybody. I don't believe in that as a sort of as a tactic. Somebody gives you a position of in their either as a friend or as a colleague. I have given President Trump personal advice over time about things he should say, not say, policies as he's asked for. Sometimes I agree with him, sometimes I don't. But I just am not one of those people that believes you go out and air those grievances publicly. So there's things that I, really applaud him for. He's been a good friend to me. I've written 4 books. He's endorsed everyone. He voted for me on a reality television show. He is somebody that has been very good to me, and I just don't believe that whether he's been good or bad, you go out and call out people who have given you opportunities and positions of within their circle. If you don't want it, don't be affiliated with them. I don't think that there's a single person that I've ever come across that's not perfect. To your point at the beginning, and I appreciate it. There's a lot of things that you get to see about people sometimes after first glance. And I appreciate your kind words about your view of me. And I think that's sometimes true of other people as well. I've gotten to know him as a person, his family, and so there are qualities of his, like we talked initially, that I might not publicly display the same way that he does, some tactics that he uses, and they're probably not similar to what I would do, but I also judge him on results, and I think he's a fighter that gets things done for the American people. So, but I think that's the way with anybody. I mean, if you look at a cousin or a friend or a coworker, you're probably like, hey, they're really nice, but I wish they would do more of this. There's, nobody's perfect, I guess, is the answer.
Evan, let me address one thing about not just about Buttigieg, but the field. I think there's 3 really important areas about which no one can tell you who's in the first tier. And I think these 3 things are incredibly important in making up who's going to be in the first tier. One was already mentioned. What's the calendar? Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, et cetera. Until you know that, I don't think you can say what the first tier is. The more important South Carolina is, I think the worse for Buttigieg, because he's tried really hard using his big brain to do better with Black voters, and there's no evidence he is. Number 2 is fundraising. It's just relentless how much you have to raise, whether you're doing a super PAC, whether you're doing bundling, whether you're doing low dollar. And I don't think you can say right now, is Pete Buttigieg going to be a first tier candidate in fundraising? Is Gavin Newsom? I think they're all extraordinarily weak compared to the front runners we've seen in the past. And again, you have to raise millions of dollars a week. And I don't think any of them can right now. Now, it's possible no one will. And so it'll be like, everybody will raise less and it'll be equalized. And then third is, who can dominate the conversation? Who can get through old media and new media and through the ideas that they have to help the country? Who can compete with Donald Trump for attention? We don't know the answer to any of those three questions about any of the candidates. I'd say Pete has as good a chance in those three as anybody else. But until we see what the calendar is and how he performs as a fundraiser and as an attention getter, I don't think he can say how he'll do or how anybody else will do. Now, did that leave any of your other questions unaddressed by me that you need addressed?
Super quick question. So he has, in essence, endorsed Newsom for now. What do you think he would do?
I don't think he's endorsed Newsom for now.
Wow,
He could say the same thing. He could say the same thing about Bashir tomorrow.
Okay,
he's not endorsed.
What if Newsom does run and Wes Moore runs? How do you think he responds?
Great question.
It's possible he'll stay out of it.
Yep.
It's possible he'll pull a Trump and endorse multiple candidates. I don't think.
Don't forget too, and with Biden, he waited till about 10 days.
Yeah, exactly. Historically, he endorses very late because he doesn't want to. Because if he endorses early, people will skip the primary because they'll say we can't win it. So I think when if he does endorse, it'll be if history's past his prologue, he'll endorse late, and everybody will have a chance to go to his fish fry and try to win his support. And he'll campaign. He'll go to their events just like he did Newsom. So he's not going to shut the door. Now, he may not be most favored for everybody, but I'm quite certain that if Kamala Harris or Wes Moore went to South Carolina, he'd be doing the same thing for them.
Don't forget, Kamala didn't even make it past August in 19. I mean, I'm serious. You just don't know.
Evan, thank you. Grateful to you for all the questions and your civility, even as you were trashing two of the three of us. Sort of. All right. Cal.
Such a liberal, Mark.
Cal says he's Gavin is my country. Was that supposed to say country or cousin?
Cousin would be interesting.
Hold on, you're muted. And for some reason, hold on, I pinned you. Didn't mean to do that. Can somebody bring Cal in and unmute him, please? Because I've screwed the whole thing up.
Yeah, I thought it said cousin. Shake your head if that's true.
No.
It says county. He's in my county.
Oh, he's in my county. Yep,
all right. What was the coverage like locally?
It's interesting because the Republicans all running for governor here are using Gavin as a piñata, right, to raise money, and it's been quite successful for the two declared candidates in raising money.
Who are the declared candidates?
Alan Wilson, he's the Attorney General, and Pan Evitt, who is Lieutenant Governor.
And Henry's term limited, right? Or he's not?
Yes.
Okay.
Foghorn Leghorn is term limited. Yes.
Okay.
I say he's a great man. He's a great man.
I say.
We don't do that here. That's what his commercials are.
Yeah. All right. What's on your mind besides Gavin in your county?
Well, I could say just quickly to Evan, South Carolina is a terrible litmus test for the Democrats. I mean, I'm a GOP guy, do a bunch of stuff with our local county party. I mean, the Democratic Party in South Carolina, besides the Black Caucus, is almost non-existent. I mean, you're talking about maybe a couple 100,000 people statewide total, right? Yeah. I mean, that are active, at least in the Democratic Party.
How many white Democratic members of the legislature are there?
That's interesting. I mean, it's a diminishing number. I think 3 of them lost in the last election. One actually, they retained one, which is half our county, Kershaw, Lee County, retained it, and he won by 100 votes, right, over the Republican.
I think the white vote in the primary was 25%. It's something like that in 2024. In 2020.
I mean, it's like nothing.
Yeah.
Right. And not nothing, but I mean, you're talking about where Gavin was in Kershaw County, voted for Trump by like 80%. Right. And I mean, and it's got like a tiny little Democratic enclave, right, in one little sector. And I just feel that that's the primary season is going to be interesting because they all have to go to Orangeburg, right, which is Clyburn's base of operations, right, and that's where they all go. And Orangeburg is not indicative of the rest of the state either, right? I just don't understand why you would make this one first. And obviously, I have many Democrat friends, eat lunch with them all the time here in the ones that are left, and I think that they are very, very moderate, right, in a sense of Democrat, right? Very moderate. Even the ones that are white Democrats, as you would say, are far more moderate in their leanings.
Well, you have to remember it went to South Carolina because the White House wanted to, they wanted to protect Biden if he was primary, that it was a state where it was heavily Black. He had the support of the delegation, or the lowercase d, kind of the intelligentsia of the Black community in South Carolina. Look, it's the same reason why did Nevada go earlier? Harry Reid pushed it, because if your state goes high, you get attention and visits and money, and exactly. So why do Iowa and New Hampshire protect it? Because it's like an industrial complex of federal, money, and outside people come in and spend.
Hey, Cal, can I ask on the race for governor? Yeah. One, what's the vibe on Nancy Mace jumping in? And two, whether she does or not, is Alan Wilson the front runner, or who pulls that out?
On Nancy, she'll have a lot of problem with the evangelical vote, a lot, right, in South Carolina, right? She has some very non-South Carolinian views, let's put it that way, on things. And she wins Charleston, which is the more cosmopolitan part of our state, right? But if you go to the Midlands and the upstate, not going to go well for her, which I think is why she hasn't stepped in the ring yet. And I think fundraising for her locally will be hard. And then she also voted to impeach Trump, right? Which everybody forgets that, right? And I think Trump would be hard pressed to endorse her, right, over Alan and Pam, who have been loyal soldiers.
I wouldn't rule it out.
Yeah, but I don't know. Alan's been Trump's guy in South Carolina since, he was a Bush guy originally, but since then he's been a cheerleader for Trump. If I was a betting man, I would say that Alan has as an inside shot. South Carolina's a very wait your turn state, with the one exception of Nikki Haley, which she didn't wait her turn. Somehow she was one that broke through the list. That's because of Mark Sanford's
Argentine on the Appalachian Trail.
So I think that if I would say it's going Alan Wilson on that end, but I think that if I was a betting man right now, but Pam's popular too. I think both those two would they might divide the same vote, though. That could hurt them if somebody else stepped in.
Cal, thank you. I'll say the winner of the South Carolina primary will be over Trump endorses. So,
and by the way, Matthew Bartlett disagrees that why New Hampshire likes to go first.
Matthew Bartlett is a shill for the Chamber of Commerce. I asked ChatGPT how many white Democrats are in the South Carolina legislature now, and it's the longest it's ever taken me to get an answer. 3 minutes and 15 seconds. And he came back and said there are 10, but it took a long time. I don't know why. Andrew, welcome in. Tell folks who don't know where you are and what's on your mind for America's sweethearts, Dan and Sean.
All right. Good morning. In Baltimore County, Maryland. First question I just had was about the Supreme Court. I saw that 8-1 decision come down yesterday. And then it's more just about the dynamics on the court at the moment. So it's like, I see that, a couple weeks ago we saw where Amy Coney Barrett kind of slapped down Ketanji Brown Jackson in her slapped down her dissent. Yeah. And then even yesterday in the 8-1, when she was the only dissenter, Sotomayor almost kind of had to correct her and her thinking. Is she kind of being ostracized a little bit on the court? And the second part of that question is is she part of Biden's legacy? Like, is her kind of out there-ness or like not being influential in the court also therefore reflect negatively on Biden and another kind of stain on the Biden legacy is kind of what I'm thinking.
Good question. My wife and I actually talked about that this weekend because there was a story, I think, in the New York Times about how aggressive she's been and in her language about democracy and outrage and it's interesting because in the history of the court, there have been members who have been in the minority, sometimes just one or two, and then 20 years later, they're not in the minority anymore. In kind of history, the world has moved towards them. I don't love the tone of her. At times she sounds like a politician. And that is, again, you can say what you want, it's a free country, but I don't love it when she uses kind of that really aggressive language. Maybe she'll be proven right. But I don't think she's doing herself any favor with her colleagues. And depending on where the country goes, it may be a stain on Biden.
Look, Andrew, first of all, a ton of credit for bringing this up.
Yeah.
It's been like something that I've been talking about for a while, and I'm really glad you brought it to the forefront of the program, because she is making nutty statements. And I think, to your point, initially it was on the conservative side saying this doesn't make sense. She's not making legal arguments, and that's the problem I have. It's one thing if her arguments hung on some random case and said, if you look back through case history, Andrew versus Sean, it says this, and therefore this legal principle violates what we're trying to do. She is using politically charged language and saying this is wrong. It's an outrage. What did she say yesterday about Trump's decision? He's taking a wrecking ball. That's a political statement. That's not one based in judicial prudence or, case law. And to me, she is so outside the mainstream of what she actually believes, because she's not, again, I get people who interpret the Constitution one way or another are going to have differences here and there on legal theories, on interpretation of case law, on precedent. That's why there's diversity on the court. But she's not hanging her shingle on that. She is literally making outrageous political statements about her personal disagreements with Trump's actions and his personality. And frankly, that was the problem with the weaponization of the courts against Trump with the cases. They weren't based, when you can literally go after a guy and say, yeah, the statute of limitations has expired. These misdemeanors, we're going to configure to come up with a new charge against him. We're going to tell the jury that they don't have to actually have a charge against him. And where the average person sits back and says, okay, I get you don't like him, but you are literally making this up as you go. We are doing damage to our judicial system. And I think she is the true wrecking ball when it comes to how cases are being decided. And if she is part of Biden's legacy, which I believe she will be, it will be about how he chose people based on DEI principles, not on their actual qualifications.
She pretty accomplished and pretty good education credentials. I mean,
but he literally said, I will appoint a black female. He never made it about the best person. And that's the point. And that's what,
she's going to get the Kamala Harris treatment.
Look, and Amy Coney Barrett, he wanted to pick a woman. I mean, both parties historically have tried to create some semblance of balance in the last 40 years. I mean, they just have.
Andrew, by sheer coincidence, I have a piece on this exact topic coming out later today on dailymail.com, so you can go read it. My full thoughts on this matter.
Is that cousin Andrew? No, I'm just joking.
Andrew, thank you. Sean, what do you have coming up later today?
Tonight we're doing a little battle for the Senate. Nate Morris is in the primary in Kentucky to succeed Mitch McConnell. He's got a very J.D. Vance story, raised by a single mother, very poor, and has been very successful. And then Senator Scott Brown seeking the seat there in New Hampshire with the retirement of Jeanne Shaheen. So I think we're talking two different Senate seats and trying to keep the majority.
Nate is the trash man.
He's the trash man.
He's the trash man, made his fortune in the garbage business. All right, 4 two-ways available to you today. First, noon, Meghan McCain, Citizen McCain. Susan Page of USA Today, pop culture enthusiast and critic of all things. Colonel Kurtz will join Meghan at noon Eastern. Please join Meghan. Moynihan Report, you can watch a pre-tape of an episode and join on the Zoom, the two-way platform. He's joined by Jonathan Gould, the music historian, and the author of a new book about the Talking Heads. That program will make sense. Join Michael at 3 o'clock. The program will air on YouTube at a later date. I'll be back at 6 o'clock for Two-Way Tonight. We'll cover all the day's news, and we'll have a talk about the crypto legislative agenda. There's a lot going on in the House, in particular with Paul Grewal, the chief legal officer of Coinbase. So join me at 6 for that. And now, for a preview of our friend Bridget's program at 7 o'clock Eastern Time, here's Bridget.
Have you or a loved one ever struggled with addiction? Are you sober or trying to become sober? What have you found that's helped you along the way? This week on Real America, my husband, Jaron, and I, we met in recovery, we'll be talking about addiction and sobriety. We'll be taking your questions, and we'd love to hear your stories about what's worked for you or hasn't. We're going to be all over. I could talk about this all day long, every day. So join me, Bridget Fetisi, on Real America, Wednesday, July 9th at 7 p.m. Eastern. We will be live discussing this. You can register to join the conversation at twoway.tv/BridgetZoom, or you can simply watch the episode at Real America Fantasy on YouTube. See you there.
Dan will be joined to talk about his addiction to exercise. So please join Bridget and Dan for that. We'll be back.
I love those things, by the way. Those teases, they are so well done.
They're awesome. Anyway, for Two Ways, please join them all, or all that you can. And we're grateful to you for being part of this community. And we will see you in 23 hours. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.